Welcome in to the NSFW Dynasty podcast. We are back. I am your host, Dave Reed, joined by my co-hosts Ryan Wilkinson and Joey Gallo. Missed you boys last week. How you doing?
Doing good. Excited for the holidays. We're in fantasy football playoff season now as well, so exciting time all around.
Yeah, 'tis the season, and it was sad to miss last week, but I think we got a lot to dig into this week. At least one of the three of us is still alive in the NSFW playoffs. So
Which one? I forgot.
At least we have that. That'd be you, Dave.
That's right. Right. Where was on your guys' power rankings?
We're still here. The good news is I get to enjoy the holidays now without having to worry about winning or losing. But it was a rough week.
Yeah, I don't feel great about my prospects going into this weekend, and it's great that it's Christmas weekend and there's football Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, which is Christmas Eve. Oh, and again Monday on Christmas Day. So it's just going to wreck my entire holiday. So it's going to be fun. I'm very excited.
It could make it that much better, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to, but I really hope so. I hope I'm surprised. Well, the thing that's crazy in our matchup is I'll be done on Sunday, and more than half of Schluter's team who I'm playing in the playoffs will not have played yet. So it's going to be a grueling Christmas Day.
Yeah, Schluter likes doing the Monday night comeback. He has a lot of Monday night players every week.
Yeah. And I don't. I never come back on Monday night. So whatever. It's fine. It's going to be great. It's fantasy playoffs. Merry Christmas. Happy belated Hanukkah. But no matter what, it's going to be fun. Got a lot of action going on. But as Joe mentioned, a lot to dig into. And we did miss last week. I apologize for that. Hand up. Got busy with work, but we're digging back in. And first, I want to jump into some injuries that occurred this past week in the medical ward. So let's jump right in. So this didn't happen in the game, but pre-game, and this left a lot of teams scrambling. Tyreek Hill was a late scratch with his ankle that he incurred the week before, leaving a lot of managers scrambling, and he missed practice again actually today on Wednesday. So you hope he gets back in the practice, gets at least a limited practice, hopefully a full practice in later this week. But something to monitor. He's trying to get to 2,000 yards on the season, but that definitely is a player that carried a lot of teams this year, so we'll see what goes on there. Chris Olave was also a late scratch last week with an ankle, but he is going to play on Thursday night, thank God, because I need him. Jamar Chase injured his shoulder and is likely to miss potentially multiple weeks, so we'll see how that goes, but he's definitely going to miss this week. Marquise Brown aggravated his heel injury that he incurred the week before. So week 16 is currently up in the air, but honestly, you probably shouldn't have been starting him anyway. But, something to keep a note. Keaton Mitchell had a nasty ACL tear. Hopefully you didn't see the video like I accidentally did on Twitter. Thank you for auto-playing videos on that platform. Zach Moss left with a shoulder injury, and currently, it's wait and see to see what his status for Week 16 is going to be. And Trey Sermon actually came in. Yeah, that's a name, but blast from the past, someone we never thought we'd hear from again, who actually played pretty well in his absence. Will Levis, his injury looked like it was going to cost him the season, but it sounds like it was only a sprained ankle, and it's still TBD if he's going to play this week. Zach Wilson, who after saying he wasn't sure if he was going to play, ended up getting a head injury and leaving the game. And sounds like Simeon is going to be the starter for Week 16. And Trevor Lawrence is currently in the concussion protocol because, of course, he gets hurt at the end of every game. And his Week 16 is currently in doubt. So we'll see what goes on there. Other things of note, not all injury related, but Mitchell Trubisky is benched and Mason Rudolph will be the starter for the Steelers on Christmas. Isaiah Pacheco is going to be back in Week 16 after missing 2 weeks, and Aaron Rodgers officially will not be coming back this year. So what are your guys' thoughts on some of those injuries?
I mean, the two big ones, obviously Tyreek Hill and Chris Olave, like you said, they were late scratches, so you kind of had to scramble to throw someone in there if you were counting on them. But those are two big names the first week of fantasy playoffs to be missing. Jamar Chase has had kind of an up and down year, and the rest of them you probably weren't really starting, or you weren't at least relying on as much as the other two. So hopefully Hill and Olave are back this week for teams that need them. And then, yeah, I mean, no surprise, Aaron Rodgers will not be coming back this year. I don't know why you would ever come back. The Jets just look like a disaster, scoring 0
Yeah,
points last week.
yeah,
Yeah,
they're horrible.
the Hill situation was weird to me too because the previous week where he got hurt, he was out, and then he was back, and then he was out again, and you kind of thought, all right, well, if he was able to return in some capacity, that initial game where the injury took place, he probably would be okay to get out there this week, last week, but then he wasn't, and now he's missing practice again. So it's weird vibes around that one. The Keaton Mitchell one is disappointing because he did look explosive and he was kind of getting a little bit of a hold on that backfield. The last couple games, he had been out there first on the field and was getting a lot of the carries between the 20s and was looking pretty good with them. So it's unfortunate, but it probably creates a little bit of opportunity for Gus Bus to resume his role of default RB and maybe fall into the end zone a couple more times. And it's I'm grateful for Steelers fans that they don't have to watch any more of Mitch Trubisky because it's never a good experience and he hasn't looked great. And I think what we've seen from Mason Rudolph in the past has been, I think, a little more functional and probably means better things for the pass catchers, the offensive skill players for Pittsburgh, George Pickens and Deontay Johnson. I think personally, probably a little upside with a little more upside with Rudolph relative to Trubisky.
Yeah, I mean, I did pick up Rudolph in a couple of leagues, and I may have to start him because I've been decimated by injuries. One of those being Herbert on the Chargers. And talk about the Chargers, they got pummeled on Thursday Night Football. The Raiders dropped 63 on them, and immediately Brandon Staley lost his job as head coach, which I think we were all waiting for. But honestly, like, what's your guys' feel on the Chargers offensive players going forward? We'll get to Eckler a little bit later, but obviously like Keenan Allen missed and he's getting older. Quentin Johnson is not the answer. Mike Williams has come back from injury. So like, what are your kind of prospects on Herbert, who is like generally viewed as a top 6-7 dynasty quarterback?
I still think he's probably up there, but I do think it's concerning. I think the change at head coach is a welcome thing that everyone's kind of been waiting for. So hopefully that'll help turn things around next year. But like you said, a lot of his weapons are either older or very injury prone, and you really look ahead a year or two, you don't really know who's going to be there. Like, is Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Austin Eckler all going to be there? If not, who's going to be there? So I think it's concerning, but if you look at the rest of the quarterbacks in the league, I think he's still definitely top 10. Definitely wouldn't put him in the top 5, but somewhere in that like 6 to 10 range probably for me.
Yeah, I would agree. I think the outlook really comes heavily down to where they land from a head coaching perspective. Um, yeah, I'm not sure what the contract situation for Keenan Allen is like, how many more years he has left. I know that Quentin Johnson hasn't been as productive as they had hoped for a first round wide receiver, but I'm not exactly ready to write him off yet. I mean, he did catch a touchdown last week. He has looked all right the last couple weeks. Still not great, but I mean, maybe a chance that he becomes something serviceable. I'm confident in Justin Herbert as a fantasy quarterback, as a decent fantasy quarterback, as long as there's a competent coach and OC in place there. I just, it doesn't seem like Kellen Moore is going anywhere. It was just Brandon Staley, and right, it was Staley was fired, and the GM as well.
Yep. I mean, when you give up, I think Staley was a defensive head coach, and when you give up 63, you're really not doing your job there. Where the offense is okay, they're just dealing with a lot of injuries.
Yeah, the offense hasn't been great
Well,
all
with
year.
Herbert, it was okay. Yeah,
Yeah,
it wasn't great. It definitely was a
no, it
disappointment.
wasn't
But
great, right? It was
Herbert,
underwhelming,
yeah,
even relative to what it was last year. Um, yeah, it's a weird situation. I think for now for the next couple weeks, I I personally would not be chasing some of the points that were put up towards the end of last week's game in garbage time against a Raiders defense that's not really very good and also was not really very motivated to um, play much defense up by however many, what were they up, 9 touchdowns at that point. So I mean,
yeah,
I know a bunch of their
lose
guys
count.
caught touchdowns towards the end, and Easton Stick actually ended up with a somewhat respectable fantasy day. Some of the wide receivers
But he
did
was
as well.
horrible.
Yeah, like
Do
I would
not
not.
let the fantasy score make you think he was good. He was not good.
Yeah, it's like Joe
He kind
said,
of
it was all garbage time points.
One of our league mates dropped him mid game. He was that bad. So,
Yeah.
you know. Um, but tell about another quarterback who did not show up this week. My boy Sam Howell. I did. I mean, I got to be unbiased here. Not great. Don't like to see him get benched. And Brissett immediately, I think, scored more fantasy points than Howell did in less time and thrown to McLaurin. So that one definitely hurt, and they have brutal matchups going the rest of the way. So I'm not excited about starting Howell because now you have this fear that he could get benched at any moment. So it definitely makes you concerned, and he's got the Jets this week, so worried about that. A couple other upsets that we had, though, were Panthers beat the Falcons, which I think everyone who hates Arthur Smith is rejoicing about. And the Seahawks came in and beat the Eagles to hand the Eagles their third straight loss, and Drew Lock becoming a hero. But wanted to see if you guys had any thoughts on like how those upsets came about. If there's any players of note from there. I mean, it was cool for me personally to see. I mean, it hurt Ryan obviously, but JSN start to get some primetime looks. Is a rookie that we've been hoping would break out. But any notable things from those upsets and or Howell benching?
Yeah, I mean, the Seahawks and the Eagles, like you said, JSN hurt us in fantasy, but the Seahawks have actually been looking pretty good the last couple of weeks. And you've been mentioning it for a while. The Eagles haven't been looking as good as everyone expected them to. So now 3 straight losses. Little concerning what's going on there. I still think they're a pretty good team and not someone you want to see in the playoffs, but Jalen Hurts also was supposedly pretty sick going into the game. So we'll see how they finish the season, but I don't know if I would call that as much of an upset as it probably would have been at the beginning of the season. And then Howell, yeah, I mean, unfortunate for you, Dave. You don't want to see him benched and then have to start him the next week in the fantasy
Right.
playoffs.
I got Minshew. I'm starting
Yeah,
Minshew.
yeah, it'd be tough to start him for sure. But like you said, Brissett came in and McLaurin actually did great once Brissett came in. So who knows what they end up doing there?
I have Brissett too. I just need them to commit to one. I can't have them both
Yeah,
playing a half a game.
yeah,
It's
you don't
it's
want to be starting a
unfortunate.
half game.
It's almost like Sam Howell has been good enough where Brissett hasn't really gotten the opportunity that I think going into the season we kind of thought there was going to be
Mm-hmm.
a tag team approach, but Howell's been competent enough where Brissett hasn't really gotten the opportunity. But Brissett's actually pretty good. Like he looked good when he came in last week, and he's been pretty good for fantasy and decent for NFL, for real football in the past. I think they should give him a shot, quite frankly. I mean, at this point, the team's not playing for much. So, uh, you know, I know it would be easier for you if they would just come out and say that. But
Just pick one.
you know,
Just pick one.
if they had just come out and said this week that they were starting Brissett, you said you had Minshew in there. Who does Indy play?
I think the
That's
Falcons, maybe.
Falcons. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right, in Atlanta. It's a tough
yeah, in
one.
Atlanta.
I,
I'm going. No
I
matter what. It's the
yeah,
Jets. I'm not playing. I'm not
I
playing
still
quarterback
think
against the
yeah,
Jets.
yeah, yeah. But maybe any other team. I think
Yeah,
I would ride with Brissett because
Yep.
He's pretty good for fantasy.
But I think they get the 49ers the following week. So there's like, I don't
Yeah.
think I'm starting the Commanders quarterback the rest of the season.
Yeah.
But moving on to another quarterback, I
I
want to
do
get
just
your
want to say one more
jump in.
thing. I know I've said this many times, and I just want to reiterate it for probably like the seventh or eighth time. But uh, I had like an 8-leg parlay. I was at a wedding on Sunday, and me and all the people who were at this wedding had a big parlay together. And the only leg of the parlay that lost was the Falcons money line against the Panthers
Mhm.
because Desmond Ritter stinks. He is not a good NFL quarterback. And for some reason, in torrential rain, with the lead, in chip shot field goal range against an absolutely atrocious team who can't score a touchdown if their entire season depended on it, just decided to do his normal. Like every game, he throws a pick directly into the chest of the DB. And in this instance, he did
It's
it
like
with
that's who he's targeting.
4 minutes to go in the fourth quarter. And naturally, uh, Carolina was able to get the ball into field goal range, and that was it. Atlanta didn't touch the ball again, and they became the second loss for the Carolina Panthers, or at the
and
hands of the
and
Carolina Panthers.
and Ritter got benched this week. It's going to be Heineke this upcoming week. It was that bad. And
Yeah,
you,
I mean, as soon as I saw it, I was like, obviously he's getting benched because
you can't play this guy again.
interception machine directly to like they're not even they don't even have it's just every week it's directly into the chest of a DB. I might do like a montage of it and put it we can put it up on our podcast TikTok and it'll just be Desmond Ritter throwing picks in the red zone right into a DB.
They're going to
All
be
right.
beautiful passes to that DB though. Like if
Yeah.
that was the intended target. Yeah,
Can't stand.
got to fire Arthur Smith. But one last note before we jump in is Kyler Murray. I kind of want to get your temperature check, Joe, because I haven't been overly impressed. I don't think he's thrown more than one touchdown in a game yet. He's had some rushing touchdowns, but as someone who drafted him early and has been waiting for him to come around because he's played at an MVP level in the past. What is your current view of him so far?
So I haven't been blown away, but at the same time I'm not concerned. He is first and foremost. I mean, he's struggling in terms of having real explosive weapons to throw the ball to on the outside,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like we kind of talked about this weird Hollywood Brown heel situation going on that's been going on for the last like 3 weeks. Michael Wilson just came back last week. Played a decent amount of snaps, played almost the whole game, but he
Yeah.
ended up with 3 targets and no catches. But again, like that's the first time they've ever been out there together. It's not like they've had a lot of like extensive time. Trey McBride is looking great, and he's basically
Beast.
the primary target in the offense. Uh, they played. He had very good numbers in his favorable matchups. So Atlanta, Houston, and the Rams, QB 13, 6, and 9. And then the last 2 weeks at Pittsburgh and home against San Francisco. Those are just not great from a matchup perspective. And he has been running, which I like. And the next 3 weeks at Chicago, at Philadelphia, home for Seattle. Those are all pretty good matchups. So I think if he finishes the year strong, and he probably will. I mean, we'll see, right? But I'm not concerned about him going into next year. I think the team's going to still be rolling with him. Um, from a fantasy standpoint, I don't think the running's going anywhere. So I don't know if he's winning a Super Bowl, but I think he'll be all right for fantasy.
Yeah, and he is averaging 17 points per game in the 5 games he's played, so it's not like it's been terrible. He's had 2 20-point games, so I agree with Joe. I think they probably stick with him next year. So fantasy wise, still relevant, but real life maybe not doing as well as you hoped.
Yeah, I mean, it is encouraging to see the running. That was the one thing you weren't sure, like how that would, how confident he'd be in that coming off the injury. But I think the biggest issue, he has no weapons outside of Trey McBride. But there's a rookie that they are currently lined up to potentially draft in Marvin Harrison Jr. that could quickly change it around next year. So this is the time of year where you start trying to make your bets before these things happen. So in the offseason, if you believe they'll make that draft pick and it could increase the value, could be a target. And if you are concerned, maybe ship them off. But this is the time of the season where you start thinking about that. Like, what is the next year's outlook going to be? But before next season, there's still the playoffs this year. So we kind of want to give you some players that we're kind of eyeing that we think could help you get to a championship or a title based on some type of players that have blown up in the past. But some of these are like some are studs that we know have gone into like God mode. Like in the past, I've had this is like Jamal Charles who just blew off. This is like that was a throwback. But I want to give some players starting off that we have kind of been studs the whole year, but we think are really going to go into God mode going to the final weeks of the season. So, Joe, I'll have you kick it off because this guy already started it off in the first week of the playoffs.
Yeah, so for me, my guy here is going to be James Cook, and it's been a couple weeks now. He's well into on fire range. So the Bills fired their offensive coordinator after their Week 10 loss at Denver, and since then Cook has posted fantasy totals of 18, 13, 23, and 35 points over the last 4 weeks, and more meaningful than that, he's getting a ton of work on the ground. So carries, I think up until the change in offensive coordinator, Cook had one game on the season with, or 2 games on the season with 15 or more carries. He's had 15 or more carries in 3 of the last 4 weeks. 25 carries last week, almost 200 yards. He's been the RB2 the last 2 weeks, and he's up to the RB5 on the season. And what's even more impressive about what he's doing is that he's doing it in the face of getting vultured on the goal line. He got vultured by Latavius Murray last week, and he got vultured by Josh Allen twice, I think, last week, and another once or twice the week before, and another, like, I think Josh Allen's actually scored rushing touchdowns in like 4 out of the last 5 games and double digits in a few. So it's a situation where he's getting a lot of volume. He's doing a lot with it. He's involved in the passing game. 7 targets, 4 targets, 7 targets, 5 targets, 3 targets the last 4 weeks. And if they needed to throw the ball more last week, they weren't dominating. He likely would have had more involvement in the passing game last week. You just the thing about you have to worry about with Cook is the touchdown variance, but the touchdown variance could swing his way too. And if he ends up with a game where he gets a goal line carry or 2, or ends up getting the touchdowns inside the 5 that have been going to Josh Allen and Latavius Murray, then I think he's. I mean, honestly, I don't know if there's anybody or very few at the running back position who you feel more comfortable about rolling out there right now with the situation the Bills are in and how well he's been performing.
Yeah, I mean, he's looked great, and if you can have a piece of that Bills offense, it's always a good thing. It's interesting because he's been doing so well. I feel like it's almost been affecting the other superstars on the Bills offense. Diggs, almost inversely of Cook, started out the season on fire, and the last couple of weeks has kind of dropped to where you're almost a little concerned starting him now. And Josh Allen, even, like you said, he's still vulturing some rushing touchdowns, so he's still getting his fantasy points, but he hasn't been putting up those like 30, 40 weeks as consistently as he was at the beginning of the year either. So,
yeah, I mean, last week he only completed 7 passes for 94 yards because James Cook was so effective. I think the quote that Josh Allen had was something of the nature of like, I feel like the kid who got an A on the class project and did none of the work because like he didn't have to do anything. James Cook just dominated the entire game.
Yeah, and it seems to be working. So you would assume they're just going to keep feeding him. So I think Joe's right. He could definitely be a huge fantasy asset these next couple weeks.
For sure.
It's good to see.
Right, you got to
It's good
jump
to
in,
see.
Joe.
No, I was gonna say it's good to see that some of these teams, like you see them run a couple times and they're kind of gashing, and then they just go away from it, right? So it's good to see that they're recognizing they have an advantage here and they're continuing to stick with it.
Yeah. Thank God they got rid of Singletary because that you would see the slashing by James Cook, and they don't
Yeah.
said, "Oh, let's go back to Singletary." But Rod, you got another running back who this is again one of Joe's boys that came in and has like had an unbelievable season. But why don't you jump in?
Yeah, I went with Kyron Williams, kind of for the same reason as James Cook, right? He had 27 carries last week, true bell cow, which is pretty rare nowadays. He's getting those goal line touches. Stafford's not going to run it in. And he finished with 152 yards and a touchdown while adding 5 catches, only for 3 yards, but still getting the targets. And the Rams offense is firing on all cylinders. So he's been looking really good. I think he's going to put up, pretty huge numbers these next couple of weeks. They face the Saints and the Giants in the next 2 games. The Saints aren't terrible against the run. They rank 16th, but the Giants rank 26th against the run. And since returning in week 12, Kyron Williams has 35, 18, 13, and 22 fantasy points. So he's got a huge role and should continue to put up some big numbers. And I think he's going to help a lot of teams win a championship. And it's not really new. He's been doing it all season, but I definitely think it continues through the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, I'm officially a believer, which is crazy because I was like, Joe knows I was like the complete opposite. I was like making jokes about it. I thought he was trash. I and the other times I actually tried to acquire him in a different dynasty league I'm in because I'm like I think they're sticking with this guy now, and like he's been the focal point of the offense. And I if you have him like that, he's definitely going to be someone who's on a lot of rostered championship teams. I think because you got him for so cheap, and he's been he's literally like a top 3 running back, and you got him for nothing
Yeah, I think he's RB number 6 on the year, but he also
with
missed
injury.
missed
Yeah,
time. Yeah, he
Yeah.
yeah.
missed what, one, two games. So yeah, he's been huge for you.
But props to you, Joe. That was your
And
call.
yeah, I mean, it worked out. It's nice to get him every once in a while. But the thing about Kyron Williams is he's involved in the passing game. He's involved between the 20s, and he gets all the goal line carries. It's one of those situations where, like, there could be a lot more running backs like him. And it's just like Sean McVay is kind of a dream to fantasy players in that he
Mm-hmm.
generally just rolls with one running back. And he gets the majority of the work. He gets the passing down work. He gets the goal line work. So that was kind of my logic in going after Kyron, which is, I had my concerns about Cam Akers with the injury, and like on the off chance that it Kyron Williams happened to hit, then like this could be in the cards, just given McVay's history. So it's pretty nice. It's good to see for him, and unfortunately, the dynasty league where I own him, where I made the savvy move to acquire him before the season started. Uh, Travis Kelsey kind of let me down, and I've been eliminated. But hopefully, he'll keep going next year.
Yeah, I mean, I think he will. And honestly, the biggest thing for me, why he actually looks like fast on the field now. Like he never to me looked fast. He was always like a plotter, and now he's like I don't know. He's just beating defenders. So I think the Rams are going to be invested in him going forward. But kind of another player who going into the season not um, wasn't highly thought of and wasn't like in redraft leagues. Definitely wasn't a highly drafted player, and rookie drafts was maybe a second round rookie pick. But has been like a revelation, and who I also now think the team is going to be committed to is Rashad White. And like, if you don't own Rashad White, you may not realize how good he's been this year. He's the RB4 in the year. And since week 7, he's been an absolute rock for your team. His fantasy finishes over that time since week 7 is the RB16, 11, 1, 12, 14, 18, 10, 6, and then 6 this last week. And they've definitely been committed to him, and he's becoming more efficient as the season has gone on. He's got 20 plus rush attempts the last 3 weeks, averaging over 4.2 yards per carry in each of those games. And to go along, he's also getting a nice receiving baseline, which has always been his calling card coming out of college. He's already has 50 receptions on the year so far. And he closes out the year with Jacksonville this week and New Orleans the next week. Neither of these that I'm that concerned about for him. And New Orleans obviously is a solid D, but I'm not concerned, especially because he's so involved in both the running and passing game. As we mentioned, like if you're involved in both, you're going to get fantasy points. So I think going forward, starting Rashad White, like you can do it with full confidence, know you're going to get at worst like a back in RB1 performance. But what are your guys' views on that? And were you aware of how good White has been this year?
Well, I have him, so I've definitely been aware
If you own
of
him,
how
you're
good
aware.
he's been. But you know what I think's interesting? We all went with running backs and all kind of went with, a true 3-down bell cow running back, which is becoming rare in the NFL. But these teams that these running backs are on are all doing well. So it's interesting that teams have kind of gone away from a true 3-down running back because the teams that have stuck with it seem to be doing pretty well.
Also, none of these players going into draft season were highly drafted. Like even preseason, coming into the season in Dynasty, you could have got them for much, much cheaper. Like at most, maybe a early, like second round pick. You probably could have got these guys.
Yeah, which goes to show, when drafting, if you can target someone that could fall into a 3-down role, it's really, really valuable.
Yeah, I think when you kind of use that like phrase, whether for redraft or dynasty, right? Like league winner. It generally speaks to a player who is performing like a top 10 guy without the top 10 draft capital, right? All these guys in redraft. Who the hell even knows where you were drafting Kyron Williams and Shad White and James
Probably got him
Prospect,
off
maybe.
waivers.
Yeah.
mid rounds at best. So yeah, it kind of makes you reminisce a little bit about the old days where there were a lot of running backs who had this kind of dominant role, and now it's like they're few and far between. And if you happen to have one of those guys, and if you didn't have to spend an early draft pick on him, obviously we could have all said Christian McCaffrey for this one, because if you have him,
Yeah.
Yeah.
probably taking you to a
He's
title.
a cheat code.
Yeah.
He's better than most quarterbacks in a super flex.
Yeah. But if you happen to have someone who's producing similarly, yeah, it's a huge advantage.
But speaking of quarterbacks, I know there's a couple other ones before we move on. Just a couple other players who we know and they have already been producing at the quarterback position that'll probably carry a lot of teams to a title as well. One guy I want to call is Brock Purdy, who is currently your NFL favorite to win the NFL MVP. I think he's like minus 200 odds right now. He's just been a stud. If you which is another crazy story. We're talking about like late drafted guy. This was the last overall pick in the NFL draft, and he might win the MVP in his second year, which is just out of control. But he's perfect fit for that offense. He's got weapons everywhere. He's been a top 6 quarterback 5 of the last 6 weeks. Absolutely crazy. And I think he might be the most owned player on like teams this year who win a title, because you got him for cheap, maybe off waivers, and he's been a stud. This week he gets the Ravens a little tough, but next week, if you get to the finals, he's playing the Commanders. They're going to light up the Commanders. Like, I don't think there's any doubt there. But I know, Rye, you have one other quarterback you want to throw out there.
Yeah, so I was also going to mention Dak Prescott. He did just put up a massive dud in Week 15. He only had 6 fantasy points and no touchdowns. So if you have him, you might not be continuing to the next round. But if you are lucky enough to survive,
or have a
bye, I do think he still holds a lot of value the next couple weeks. Since his bye in Week 7, if you exclude last week, he's been averaging 33 points per game over 7 weeks. So, that's really, really good value. And we've talked about quite a few high-end QBs going down, like Burrow and Herbert, and some others not performing like we're used to. Mahomes is only averaging like 19 points a game. So Dak may turn out to be one of the best quarterbacks for the next 2 weeks if he can get back to what he was doing before Week 15.
Yeah. And one other player just to keep an eye on, and these are studs again that you've had on your team, is Jonathan Taylor. He's hurt. but Zach Moss also got hurt, and the Colts are actually in the playoff hunt right now. I think they're the 7th seed, and Colts actually never put Jonathan Taylor on IR, which means they thought that he could get back earlier than 4 weeks potentially, and he's already missed 3 weeks of games, so he's in a realistic window to potentially get back this week, and he's got some solid matchups against Atlanta this week and the Raiders next week. So not giving the full award for potentially going fantasy god mode, but there is the potential that he comes back and goes beast mode these final 2 weeks and is the player that you hoped he was when you drafted him.
Yeah, I have a lot of regrets about not owning Brock Purdy in this league.
Same.
I liked him a lot, and I feel like we had a lot of Trey Lance banter, and I was kind of just like, yeah, but Purdy's going to be the starter. He's getting all the hype, and I didn't put my money where my mouth was then. And then I reached out to Schluter kind of like week 2 or 3, like, hey, is Purdy available? And he kind of responded something like, what the hell's going on with Purdy? You're like the 5th person to reach out to me about Purdy this week. And I think he wised up and decided to just hang on to Purdy.
He was kind of available at one point. I was debating it as well. I was like, yeah, maybe I'll kick that can. And now I have to play him. So great.
Yeah, the tables have turned on you, Dave.
Not great. But moving on to the next section. So those are studs. Those are players that you expected to be doing well, but they're the ones that we think are really going to be a rock for your team. But a lot of teams win for the players that come out of nowhere. They're your bench players that really just get hot at the end of the season. Jerick McKinnon last year just came out of nowhere and just started going bonkers. And these are the players that really put you over the edge. So I want to give a couple calls there. So, Rye, your guy actually already blew up this past week, but I think is a great call because he's someone that people are getting excited about.
Yeah, and in my defense, I did have this guy queued up before he put up his 23-point performance.
I'll test to that. I'll test to it. You did.
But yeah, I went with Ty Chandler. This is a guy you likely hadn't started all year until maybe last week. He was averaging like 3 points a game. His 2 best weeks were 10 points and 13 points. And outside of those weeks, he had done pretty much nothing. However, with Madison missing last week, the door opened and he had 23 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown, which is basically what Madison owners have been hoping for all year. He also seems to be taking over the lead role, even with Madison coming back. The Vikings head coach said he is absolutely a guy that is going to see a featured role in our offense. And he's been performing better than Madison when he's had the chance anyways. So he faces the Lions and the Packers over the next 2 weeks. Packers are pretty bad against the run. So I think he continues to stay hot and will be a huge asset in the fantasy playoffs.
Yeah, and he looks good.
So good. He's so like awesome. Maybe it's because Madison looks so not explosive that Chandler looks so good. But he just why was this guy not playing earlier in the year? He's just so much better than Madison.
Yeah, I think it's just that everyone thought this was going to be Madison, but it turns out it's Chandler, and he's literally hitting at the exact perfect time. Week 1 of the fantasy playoffs, he goes off for 23 points and now should be featured hopefully the next 2 weeks as well. Maybe it's a little concerning. Madison comes back and they give him some carries, but I don't know. After that performance, if you're the Vikings, I think you got to feed Chandler the ball.
Yeah, I think they've been looking for an excuse to not give Madison the ball, so they finally have it. But another guy who actually blew up this past week, but I also had queued up. He did have a good week the other week, but the guy who I think is going to be carrying a lot of teams to the titles is David Njoku. Because after what has been somewhat of a disappointing career so far, because you've seen flashes from Njoku before, but they have never been sustained, but it's because it's always been small spurts. It seems like he's finally putting it together because the Browns finally have an elite quarterback in Flacco.
Zinger to all those Watson owners.
He loves it. That's right. Flacco is the QB of the Cleveland Browns future right there. He has finished as the tight end 2 the last 2 weeks, and he had targets last week of 14 and the week before of 8. And he's always been, again, a red zone target because he's like an athletic freak. And it did work again in his favor those past 2 weeks. He had 1 touchdown this past week and 2 the week before, but he's also now a primary read in the offense with that type of target count. Again, always an athletic freak, but you combine that with those target counts and a team that cannot run the ball, so they're going to be throwing the ball a ton. And I think Flacco's thrown at least 44 pass attempts each of the past 3 weeks. Plus, he's got a solid schedule for tight ends with Houston and New York Jets in championship weeks. And Njoku's going to potentially finish the year as the tight end 1 or at very worst, a high-end option there. And it's crazy because I know I wasn't really a believer for a while, and Joe and I have owned him in another league, and we kind of just were out on him. He's going to carry a lot of teams out there. We'll see what happens going beyond this year, but right now when you're trying to win a title, Njoku's definitely going to help you.
Yeah, and like you said, it's always been red zone for him, but they're hitting him downfield. Like some of these touchdowns that he's scoring the last couple of weeks since Flacco took over have been downfield touchdowns, like 20, 25, 30 plus yards. So it's pretty awesome. It's good to see, and he's definitely got the skills in his bag. It's just not the way they were using him in the offense previously.
Guy's also really tough. I don't remember. He burned his face off like a couple months ago and didn't miss a game. This guy's insane. But Joe, why don't you tell us who you got?
Yeah, so for me, I was funny. Like as I was kind of thinking about this, I'm like, we probably could have named this award after James Conner as well. And he doesn't come out of nowhere per se. He comes out of nowhere in the respect that he's drafted with decently high capital and then kind of disappears for some point of the season. He underwhelms. He gets hurt. He misses 5 to 7 weeks, and then he comes back, and that's kind of where he emerges out of nowhere to win you fantasy championships. And it's not surprising that this year it's kind of the same script where after 9 weeks of kind of uselessness, Connor's heating up again at just the right time. So last year, Connor started slow, missed time, and underwhelmed, and then returned late in the season and ripped off RB finishes of 5, 14, 4, 4, 12, 5, 15 from weeks 10 through 17 and was an integral part of a lot of fantasy champions. And if you fast forward to this year, the last 2 weeks, Connor has put up 23 and 17 points, respectively, good for RB5 and 11 finishes after, like I said, I think he missed 6 weeks in the middle of the season, 6 or 7 weeks. Had an okay start to the season, but then was hurt. And Arizona's passing offense, like I mentioned earlier, is having some issues. Obviously, they're banged up. Their number 1 target is tight end at this point by far.
Yeah.
But they have Chicago and Philadelphia the next 2 weeks. And Philadelphia is on paper a good rush defense, but they just had quite a bit of trouble with Ken Walker last week. He really, really sliced them up on Monday night. And I wouldn't be surprised to see. I mean, obviously Chicago is pretty terrible against the run, but I wouldn't be surprised to see Connor put up good numbers against both of these two defenses to finish up the season. So I think it's going to be a very similar script for James Conner's season this year as it was last year.
Wish he wouldn't because I think I'm playing him. But no, I agree. He's been looking great the past few weeks. And yeah, it's crazy that certain running backs just get stronger as the season go on, or healthy in Connor's case, because he usually just missing out. But I do want to call out a couple other players, and I want to jump in on one because you kind of alluded to him, is Trey McBride, which we haven't given, I don't think, too much love to, and I think we really need to start doing it because he's making the case to be a top 3 tight end in Dynasty. And like, if you said he was the top tight end in Dynasty, I wouldn't say that's a crazy statement. I'm not saying I believe that, but I think there is grounds to believe that because he has been an absolute stud this past week. He's the only reliable pass catching option for the Cardinals. He's getting like 9 targets a game. And if you watch him, he's making like big boy catches. These aren't like just like little dink and dunks. Like he is like jumping up over defenders. And he does have a pretty juicy schedule to close of the year. So I think he's going to be someone as well who's going to carry a lot of teams to a title at the end of the year. But guy came out of nowhere. He looked like he might have been a disappointed after his rookie year, but he is looking like a potential stud at the tight end position.
Yeah, and the tight end landscape in general has just changed so much this season. I'm looking at the top tight ends from week 15, and it's Laporta, Njoku, Henry, and McBride. If you said that those were going to be the top 4 tight ends at the beginning of the season, you'd be crazy. So I know we're going to talk about some of the top tight ends later in the podcast, but it's interesting to see. And, I think both tight ends you've mentioned, Dave, definitely are going to help some teams win.
For sure. Any other players jumping out at you guys that you think are going to come out of nowhere and help some teams get to a title?
We named it the Jerick McKinnon Award, so I feel like we have to mention Jerick McKinnon himself. He literally scored 16 fantasy points in Week 15 and 11 in Week 14. Obviously, that was just because Pacheco was out. But hey, if Pacheco is injured and McKinnon keeps finding some playing time, that's a guy who you definitely weren't starting before Week 14, and all of a sudden, here he is, fantasy relevant again in the playoffs.
Yeah, and I would throw Gus Edwards out there. I think he was, like I mentioned earlier in the pod, Keaton Mitchell was getting a little more of the between the 20s opportunities. He was the first guy on the field the last couple games, but obviously now he's done for the year, and Baltimore wants to be a run-first offense, and Gus will continue to get opportunities as the lead back there. So I think maybe not totally out of nowhere, but he's had another one of those seasons, Gus, that's kind of been like up and down. He was very, very good for a while, and then when Keaton emerged, he kind of started to fade a bit. But I think he's gonna come back on strong to finish out these last couple weeks.
Yeah, I really wish you would stop picking Schluter's team players. But alas, but I got a couple deeper cuts for the listens here. Noah Brown is someone who was probably just lucky in your bench. You made it cut out for waivers, but he's flashed a couple times this year when he was the lead wide receiver. And this past week, he did it again. He went had 11 targets and went 8 for 82 and a touchdown. And that was with Keenum at quarterback. And it does sound like Keenum's going to be the quarterback again this week against the Browns. But Nico Collins is still a little banged up. He may be back, but I think Noah Brown is still a good start this week. But if you get to the championship game and Stroud is back in week 17, which he sounds like he should be, you get to play the tight end secondary. And I think Noah Brown is going to blow up in week 17. So that's someone who, if you have on your bench, I'd be very excited about. Gardner Minshew, a little biased because I have him in a lot of spots, but he's been a very good streaming quarterback too. And he's put up some solid weeks. Obviously, this past week was a big blowout week for him, but he's had a lot of games where he's been like a back end QB1, high end QB2. And with all the injuries at quarterback, I think this is a good pivot if you have that ability. And he has a pretty decent schedule. He's got Atlanta, who is not the worst defense, but they're not the most elite either. So I think he'll still be okay. And they got the Raiders in week 17. So as long as he gets Michael Pittman back, I think they'll be okay. Especially also if he gets Jonathan Taylor back and he does some dump offs and see JT take it to the house. And a super deep cut. Hunter Henry. Obviously, we talked about the tight end landscape emerging, but some people are still fishing for a good tight end. And Hunter Henry has had a great connection with Zappe in the red zone lately. He had 2 touchdowns 2 weeks. I think it was 2 weeks ago, and then 1 last week. But this past week he actually got 9 targets and went 7 for 66. So he seems to be a reliable target for Zappe. The one thing I will caution, he did get banged up, so we'll see if he's playing this week or not. But he does have some decent matchups for the tight end position against Denver and Buffalo to close out the year. So if you're really just swimming in the muck here for a tight end, I think Hunter Henry could potentially actually have a big blowout week for you.
Yeah, I mean, there's no one else there, for the Patriots. So Hunter Henry's, getting 9 targets because who else are you going to throw the ball to? But yeah, I mean, he had 20.
Zeke is you're going to throw it to.
Yeah, he had 20 fantasy points in week 15. So definitely on the radar.
Yeah, both he and Trey McBride on my roster, in addition to Dallas, go there. So in the offseason,
Go there. So I am.
NSFW folks, if anybody's in need of a tight end, the shop will be open, and if anybody wants to reach out,
That's right.
I likely won't be looking to hang on to all three of them.
Who knows? I've started a lot of tight ends this year. But moving to the final section is the All Rookie Super Bowl Award, or the ARSB, or Amon-Ra St. Brown Award, because in Amon-Ra's rookie year, he blew up the back half of the year. And this does happen a lot. Rookies put together the back half of the season, and they can carry you to a title. So who are some rookies that we think are going to help carry some players to a title? So, Joe, why don't you jump in first?
Yeah, so I'll take the easy road here, and I'll go with Jahmyr Gibbs. I think it would be a shame to not mention him for recognition in the category where we talk about rookie awards, where the last couple of weeks he's really looked like probably the most explosive and dynamic rookie of them all. Gibbs has looked stellar, and he's getting into the end zone. He's getting more opportunities on the ground. And another thing that I've noticed is Detroit's defense has gotten significantly worse kind of as the season has gone on. And as a result, Gibbs has found, I don't know if there's exactly correlation, but when they're in competitive and negative game script, I feel like Gibbs is on the field a little bit more, and they use him in the passing game a little bit more. We talked about the last couple of weeks how maybe the safest bet in like all of football is the Jahmyr Gibbs over 13, 14, 15, 16, whatever his longest rush prop is. I think we've hit it. How many weeks in a row have you hit it, Dave?
Eight weeks, and it only wasn't longer because I think he was hurt the week that like 9 weeks ago. I was looking back too because like betting it, it's a money printing machine. I bet it without a doubt. Like I don't care the NFL slate. That's the first thing I throw down on.
Yeah, and like you said, right? Like the last couple weeks with Montgomery fully healthy, he's still putting up big numbers. He's still getting into the end zone he's getting into the end zone on the ground. He's getting into the end zone in the air. And I mean, he doesn't have the best matchups the rest of the way. At Minnesota and at Dallas are both relatively difficult, but Detroit's in the middle of a playoff race right now, and their defense hasn't been very good, especially against the pass. So I think that he's going to continue to have, hopefully the rushing opportunities stay where they are. And I mean, it would be nice. I would love to see them bump up just a hair. But it shouldn't really matter as long as he's breaking huge explosive runs with the opportunities that he gets. So Jahmyr Gibbs hopefully keeps it going. And it's just been awesome to watch.
Yeah, I mean, I'm glad you called him out too because he does have tougher matchups, and a lot of people when they're looking at their playoffs, who's going to blow up, they look at the matchups. But also, you got to look at just like certain players are just like doesn't matter what their matchups are, and Gibbs is that type of player. Like I don't care who his opponent is, he's going to get his and be great. So that's a good endorsement. Be like, don't shy away from Gibbs. He'll carry you to a title,
especially against Minnesota. Dallas, we'll see that.
Yeah.
Although James Cook just kind of beat up Dallas.
Yeah. If James Cook can slash the Dallas D, I think Gibbs probably can as well.
Yeah.
What about you, Rye?
Yeah, so I went similar to Joe, a pretty easy pick. We've talked about him a lot lately, but I went with Rashee Rice. He's exploded over the last 4 weeks, so it isn't really a surprise pick, but I think he's the rookie that can lead you to a championship. Over the last 4 weeks, he's averaging 10 targets and 8 catches and about 15 fantasy points per game. And he's finished as the wide receiver 3, 26, 12, and 10. And now he's facing the Raiders and the Bengals in the fantasy playoffs. None of those teams really strike fear in you. So I think he's going to keep it going. Plus, he has the added bonus of having a pissed off Mahomes throwing him the ball. Mahomes, you got to assume is not going to throw to Tony anymore after what's been going on with him. So Rice might even get a few extra targets over the next few weeks, and he's turning into a stud at the perfect time. I know we talked about Schluter trading for him back when that trade happened. He wasn't really the focal point of the trade, but I think if we went back to that one now, Rice might be the most valuable asset in it.
Yeah, I really wish you guys stopped picking Schluter's team in these segments. You're killing me here.
Yeah,
Had to. He just took me out.
Oh
everything
man.
is going the right direction for Rice, where the KC defense hasn't been as good. They needed to score a little more points. Pacheco went out. Kelsey looks slow. Kadarius Toney is a walking mistake. Like, it just, everything points to him being the guy that Mahomes needs to use, and they're building a growing rapport as the season goes on. So it's awesome.
Yeah, I'm scared. Yeah, I'm going to move on. I don't think these guys are on Schluter's team, but who knows? He probably owns all these guys. But I'm going double dipping with a pair of rookie Green Bay wide receivers, Jaden Reed and Dontavian Wicks. So first, gonna say Reed. We've already kind of discussed him earlier this year, but he's kind of turning to like a Debo light the way that he's used in Green Bay. He's just a baller, and with Christian Watson going out with his injury with his hamstrings, his targets have been on the rise. This past month, he's been getting targets of 8, 5, 10, and 8 this past week. But he's also getting looks in the run game and has actually taken in a couple of rushing touchdowns. So he's proving to be very highly effective in both the passing and rush game. So if you have him, I'd be very excited. I think he's only going to grow his usage there. But on the other hand, you got Wicks, who was a later draft pick. He was, I think, in the 5th round of the NFL draft. But the Packers seem to love this guy, and his usage continues to grow over this past month. He's seen his snap percentage grow each week over the last 4 weeks, with this past week being at 78% of snaps. He's also getting more targets with 6 and 7 the past 2 weeks. And this last week, he actually finished with 6 for 97. And he's the perfect complement to Reed, which is kind of why I grouped them together, because he's a deep ball, field stretcher type of wide receiver. His yards per target has been above 10 all year. And he does have a lower floor, but with his target share rising, and the increased usage, his floor is increasing as well, and he has the potential to blow up any given week because he could take a long shot to the house. So that, and the Packers actually get the Panthers this week, which is a great matchup, and the Packers are in the playoff hunt as well. So you always want your players in fantasy playoffs to be on teams that are in the NFL playoff hunt as well, because they're going to be trying a lot harder to win all their games. And they're not going to be resting at all. So getting any of these rookie wide receivers on Green Bay, I'd be pretty excited about.
Yeah, I think both of those guys have looked good. Maybe it comes down a little bit to Christian Watson. He's missed the last 2 weeks, so those targets have probably gone to these guys. But if Watson continues to miss more time, these are definitely guys you could probably throw in your lineup.
Yeah,
if Watson comes back, he'll probably get hurt again.
Also true.
And like you said, I mean, Reed is getting looks in the run game and doing good things with them, so he'll continue to get those looks, I think, even with or without Christian Watson out there.
I agree. And one other rookie we got to say, but it's almost too obvious, but Sam Laporta, he already helped teams last week. He had 3 touchdowns, dominated. He might be the tight end 1 in Dynasty already. He's just doing things that you never have seen a rookie tight end do, and he's so young. And him and Gibbs are like focal point, and obviously Amon-Ra. Like that offense, like having pieces of that are great, and he's a key piece of that. So couldn't leave the section without at least giving Laporta a shout out.
Yeah,
but with that being said,
the same logic that we talked about with Gibbs, where the more Detroit's defense regresses, the more their offensive weapons are just going to be.
They got to keep throwing,
especially when they're in a dome at home, not on the road, outdoors. It's a great fantasy situation.
Absolutely, but on the flip, there are some players that I want to get your guys' thoughts on. What are your feelings? Because I feel like you got to approach them with caution. And these are players that have been studs, highly drafted. They're key pieces of your team, but whether it be situation or matchups or how they've been producing lately. How are you feeling about them? And some of the names I just want to run off, and you can jump in on whichever ones you guys want to talk about. But Bijan Robinson, Saquon Barkley, Brees Hall, Travis Etienne, Patrick Mahomes, Derrick Henry, and Eckler, I'm sure we'll get into as well. But these are guys that were staples of your lineup for most of the year that, at least for me, I'm starting to have some concerns about starting in the fantasy playoffs. I want to get your thoughts on.
Yeah, I mean, you're definitely concerned about all those guys. I don't know if you're necessarily concerned about Mahomes. You're concerned he's not going to have a 30-point week. But in terms of the running backs, Eckler, I'm pretty sure he's done as a runner. Spiller had more rushing attempts in week 15, and Kelly also got 5. So his value now is really as a pass catcher. He had 4 catches on 6 targets, but only 29 yards last week. So he definitely is a real risky start. He hasn't looked great, and we talked about it earlier. The Chargers offense has just looked horrendous in general. Did just fire their coach, so maybe that, pumps up the team and something changes here and Eckler has a good week. But, you're definitely not super pumped about what he's been doing over the last couple of weeks. And then Bijan, he always looks great, but like you said, it's his usage. He only had 8 touches, so there's not much you can do with that usually. And, it'll be interesting to see if they start using him more.
Yeah, it's maybe they will. It's kind of been like very inconsistent with him the whole season, so kind of just gotta. If you manage to survive last week with Bijan and you still got him, I don't think you can bench him. So I think you just gotta hope that Arthur Smith realizes that he barely touched the ball and they lost the game to the worst team in the league. So maybe he should touch the ball.
Yeah,
The one that
8 touches, ridiculous.
The one that you mentioned, I would say that I'm maybe the least concerned with, just because of the matchup. I think would be Brees Hall going up against Washington. Washington can't stop a nosebleed at this point, and I think that I think that game is in New York. So I just think if anybody on the Jets is going to do anything against, I don't think Washington's going to come in and pitch a shutout in that one. And Zach Wilson has looked functional, and when he passes the ball, Brees has been pretty involved in the pass game. So, their offensive line is a legitimate catastrophe, but I think if he can be involved in the pass game and against Washington, it might not even matter. So he's one where at least next week I would feel reasonably confident putting him out there. And I'm also saying that looking to hit him with a strong reverse jinx because I'm facing him in another league semifinal. I completely agree with Eckler. Have him in a dynasty, and honestly, it's at this point I'm like, if he can sign in a place for like some minimal amount that might stoke some kind of excitement for next year, and I can trade him for any value, then that would be, I think, a gift. He's unfortunately looking pretty cooked. The one other player I'll mention is Travis Kelce, who it's unfortunate to say, but he really has not been getting it done this year, not nearly in the way that you needed him to, or that you in both redraft or dynasty, you kind of need somebody like Kelce with the draft capital that you spent to get it done. And he has not been terrible. He's still last couple of weeks, tight end 3, 6, 7, 8. Last week 24. But the numbers, it's good for 12. He's basically averaging between 10 and 12 points a week, which is fine, but it's not what you need from Kelce, given the draft capital that you spent, or the advantage that you need to have, or you need him to give you in order to win. So, unfortunately, I don't. I mean, the like you mentioned, they have the benefit of a good schedule, Vegas and Cincinnati, the next 2 weeks. So, maybe he'll put in a good performance in the playoffs one time for old time's sake. But he does look a hair of a step slower. And frankly, I don't say this in jest. Um, this season, unlike any other season with Kelsey, he's had a lot of things going on outside of football. And I don't necessarily, you can say all you want that it doesn't affect your preparation, it doesn't affect your performance, but like when you're experiencing what he is right now, like kind of being really, really, really skyrocketed into even more kind of fame and stardom than he even originally had, and also like um, you know, dating one of like the most like eligible female artists in the world. It's just I wouldn't be even a little surprised if all of that wasn't having at least a marginally negative effect on his output this year. But it also could just be that he's 34 years old and losing a step, and there's no other players besides maybe Rashee Rice in that offense that's even worth the defense looking at. But yeah, I mean, Travis, hopefully you get it done. But at least I can thank you for dragging Team Cropa down and improving my first round draft pick in this league marginally going into next year. So thank you for that.
Yeah, I think those are all good calls. And I agree. I'm not worried about Brees Hall this week, but it is weird because Brees Hall, like, you expect him just every game to rip off a long run. That was kind of what he did his rookie year. And when he first came, like, seemed like he was fully healthy this year, that's what he did. And you haven't seen that at all this year. Like, he hasn't been ripping off long runs at any point. The offensive line is a mess, and that's probably a big factor in it. But I do think he'll finally get a long run in against the Commanders. But it's just been weird to not see that explosiveness out of Hall at all this year. ETN, I just want to call out because if he doesn't get a touchdown, he kind of stinks. Like, that's really just what it comes down to. He's not an efficient player. Even when he gets a touchdown, it's not always elite, but early in the season, he was getting all the touchdowns for Jacksonville, and that's kind of shifted where he gets them a little bit more sporadically, and he's kind of hurt you over the past, like, 6 or 7 weeks. And then finally, like, Derrick Henry, the cliff might be here against the Texans, who he usually smashes. I think I saw that he was averaging, like, 30 fantasy points per game against the Texans in his career, which is, like, crazy. This past week, he had 20 touches. 5 of them were receptions. He had 13 yards. I don't think that's possible. Like, I don't understand how that's possible. And the Texans are not an elite defense. They've improved, certainly, but they're not an elite defense. So the cliff for Henry might be there. He still has a decent schedule, but I'd be getting a little bit worried if I had him on my roster moving forward. But with that said, the regular season ended, and we have to crown our winners for the high and low scores on here. So first, going to give the high score winner, and it was the Wilkinson Bros, who was scary there for a little bit, but thought they were just going to be the low score winner. But in week 12, they came up big, just coming up short of 200 points. They finished the week with 199.46 for the high score of the year. But the low score, which was shocking how low this got. 2 people actually, as I mentioned, beat the low score that week, but this one, I don't know if this will ever be beat in the history of this league. The Clark Sauce team, they scored 33.8 points. There were, I think, 5 or 6 players that week who scored more than that alone, and they had 10 players go. Just to remind everyone what our format is. So, yep, they will be funding the consolation bracket grand prize. So thank you, Clark Sauce, for funding that with your charitable contributions.
Yeah.
How do you feel, though, Ryan, about winning?
Yeah, it feels good. It's not the score that we thought we were going to be winning. I was pretty sure we were going to be winning the low score, but yeah, it covers up the pain a little bit of getting knocked out of the playoffs. We at least aren't leaving empty-handed, so it's always a good thing.
Yeah, and he put up a 141 this week to eliminate me from the toilet bowl contention. So if he happens to win another 2, then maybe it'll be left pocket, right pocket for that.
That's right.
So he still got a chance.
Fighting to keep that, but let's jump into some of these playoff matchups. And you know what? Since we're talking about the consolation bracket, let's do that one first. Because we have two matchups left in there to get to the title. And I want to see who you guys think are going to win. And then after that, who you think is going to win the title. So the first matchup, we got Cohen and Kat versus Canels. Who you got in that matchup?
I'm actually going to go with Canelos there. His team's been pretty hot lately. He's got Ty Chandler, who we talked about. He's got Pukanuka. We've talked about the Rams firing on all cylinders there. And he has Dak Prescott, who I do think has a huge rebound game this week. Not for nothing, though. Team Adam does have Laporta. And, Justin Jefferson's back. So I think it's close, but I think Canales takes it.
Yeah, I do think it'll be a close one as well. It's unfortunate for Team Adam that CJ Stroud's missing again this week. It's also a shame for Team Canelos that Devin Singletary, who's actually low-key been dominating, has a tough matchup versus Cleveland. I think I would lean Team Canelos in that matchup as well, but it's going to be a close one. These are very, very equally matched, and there's some obstacles for each one, so it should be a tight matchup.
Yeah, I agree. I'm going with Canales as well, and one of the things that'll be interesting to see is what Gabe Davis does for the Cohen Cats team, because if they put up a goose, they're out. But if he puts up the random blowout week, who knows? Maybe he squeaks one out here. And the other matchup is Scott versus Clark Sauce, who we just discussed, who knocked out Joey.
Yeah, I'm going to go Scott there. I think looking to avenge a tough end to the regular season, projected to win this one by over 20 points. And he has the X factor in Christian McCaffrey on his team. So I would go Scott.
Yeah, I mean, I gotta agree there. You can't pick Clark Sauce right now. They do have James Cook, who we talked about, but it's interesting. Neither one of them has a quarterback in the Superflex, but I think Scott takes this one home for sure and has McCaffrey, who should lead him to an easy victory.
Yeah, I'm also going Scott there. I mean, McCaffrey, with all the quarterbacks there, is the highest projected points total. So, guys, cheat code. You don't even need a second quarterback when you have McCaffrey. So, I'm going with Scott. So, we all have the same predicted title for the consolation bracket. Who you got between Canales and Scott? Who do you think is going to take it all?
I think it's going to be Scott. With
I
a little
was
bit
going
of
to say
G
Scott as
magic.
well.
And Christian.
I'm going Canales. I think the Dak. I think he's got a lot more depth and a lot more chances of upside. I think it will be tight though, so it'll be a fun one to watch. But who cares? The consolation brackets, real playoffs is what we want to hear about, right? No, you probably don't because I'm the only one in it. Let's go. Anyway, yeah, I had a bye because I would have got punted out real quick if I did not have a bye. My team was horrendous last week, but let's talk about the first matchup of Mike Caffer and Mike Williams against the Rosinski Bros. Who you guys got in that matchup?
This is a tough one. I feel like they've been back and forth all year, division rivals. I honestly think I'm going to go with Dan's team, but super, super close. I wouldn't be surprised if either one wins this week. I think it's going to be a real close matchup. I like both of their teams, but I'm going to give it to Dan's team.
Yeah, I like Dan's team as well. I think the difference makers, T. Higgins, who is balling out right now with Jamar Chase banged up. Even before Jamar Chase got banged up, T. Higgins has kind of been balling out. And Raheem Mostert, who is also balling out and is good for, I think his odds to score 2 touchdowns the last couple of weeks has been like a 2 or 3 to 1. Like it's barely any. You're not really getting much. It's like the expectation is that Mostert's scoring 2 touchdowns. So I would lean Dan's team there as well.
I'm actually personally in Caffer and Williams, and the reason is I think there's a lot more risk and things that can go wrong on the dance team. Like Goff can have a big dud. We expect Eckler to have a dud. Sutton, he needs to get a touchdown. Devonta Smith, if it's not his game, could be a lower point scorer. And Pollard has kind of disappointed. And Tua against the Dallas D, I don't love. Where the rest on actually Kaffir and Mike Williams' team, I think they just have a higher floor across the board. Obviously, the upside is on the dance team, but I think they sneak it out because I think there's going to be more flops on the Brzezinski Bros team than I think is currently projected. So I'm going with the upset, if you will, there. But moving forward to the real matchup, myself versus Schluter. I think I have a feeling how most people are going to vote on this one, but what do you guys think?
Yeah, I am going to go with Schluter here. Honestly, even before the playoffs.
This is your brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law, but even before the playoffs, I didn't want to play him. I really like his team. I think, honestly, Dave, your team's a little banged up. You got Lawrence, who's a little injured. You're starting Minshew because Howell's probably getting benched. Olave missed last week, but Schluter has a lot of the guys we talked about. Like you said, he's got James Conner, he has Gus Edwards, he has Rashee Rice, he has Brock Purdy. So I'm not only picking Schluter in this matchup, but when we get to it, I'm picking Schluter to take home the championship title this year.
Okay, yeah. All right. What about you, Joe?
Yeah, so I would lean Schluter in this one. I think that the reason for me personally is not so much in the 1 through 5 spots. Lawrence, Montgomery, HN, Lamb, Olave is a very, very strong 1 through 5. And you could even include Hawkinson there. It's the Hopkins, Elliott, Javonte, Minshew tier that I think when you kind of look across the board at, the likes of JSN and Flowers and Rashee Rice and Brock Purdy, these are guys who have been a little bit more consistent. Zeke was not great last week, although Denver is susceptible to the run. So I actually could see him putting up pretty good numbers. I'm pretty high on Stephon Diggs this week, just based on the fact that the Chargers have an abysmal passing defense. And I think this is also a situation where Buffalo is looking to get him back involved. I think they realize that they need him for the rest of the season and the playoffs. And the running game has been working, and I think they're going to stick with it. But I also think they're going to make a concerted effort to get Diggs a little bit more involved this week. And talked about Connor and Edwards earlier. Tough matchup for Baltimore, and Schluter does have Lamar, Edwards, Flowers, all against San Francisco. So it's definitely not by any means going to be, in my opinion, a runaway. I think you have a pretty decent shot, but I would give Schluter the slight edge.
And who would you say before I jump in, who do you think would get the title then between your Schluter and the Brzezinskis?
I'm going to go with the Brzezinskis. I think top to bottom, their roster appears to me the deepest, if you will. I think the Dolphins have a pretty good matchup in championship week. No, they don't at Baltimore. So that actually is pretty unfortunate for the Brzezinskis. Gibbs, Higgins, Njoku we talked about, Mostert, Devonta Smith. I just think I probably have the most confidence in those guys to continue to produce. And I'm going to go Brzezinskis.
Well, you're all wrong. I'm winning both matchups. I'm winning this title. Get out of here. I'm taking Schluter down, and I'm taking the title.
You got a shot.
Believe it, baby. I got a shot. I got a shot.
I think all 4 teams really do have a shot. I'm giving it to Schluter, but I wouldn't be surprised if anyone won it.
He's got 6 players on Monday. Unbelievable. That is going to be death by a million cuts.
Your Christmas is going to be something else.
I'm going to be cooking my prime rib and check my phone and be like, oh, damn it, someone got a long touch.
That prime rib may be burnt. We don't know.
Yeah, I'm going to forget about it. Guys, screw it. Christmas is over. Get out of my house. But with that, any final thoughts, guys?
No, good luck to everyone in the fantasy playoffs, and happy holidays as well.
Yeah, let's hope you have your full roster. It'd be good to see you out there with Lawrence out there with Achan getting full snaps, and yeah.
I know. I don't know if I've had a full roster all year, but it's okay. And Merry Christmas to all. Schluter, honestly, you got other things outside of fantasy to worry about, and I hope that becomes your focus because hopefully I take you out. But with that, thank you guys for listening. It's been a pleasure talking with you, and good luck in your matchups, except for Schluter.
Merry Christmas, guys.
Episode of the NSFW Dynasty podcast. Tune in next time.